All right, we're back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Professor John Viles with us, professor over at MTSU, and we're talking about the conventions. And, going into the break, I was just wondering, I don't know about viewers if they've been watching them both really closely. Do you tend to think that Republicans and Democrats alike watch both conventions, or do you tend to just have the Democrats watching the Democrats and the Republicans just watching the Republicans? How do you think that plays out?
I hate to say it, but I'm not sure anybody's watching either of them.
Either one. Well, there's a lot of other things going on, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's not completely fair. I think that conventions are more likely to reinforce existing attitudes than they are to convert. And in my judgment, the Republicans have tended to appeal almost solely to their base. Now, the one exception is you saw quite a number of African-American males last night, which seems to suggest maybe some thought that they might be able to get a few of those to cross the aisle. But for the most part, they've been trying more to mobilize their own supporters than they have to convert or bring in supporters from the outside.
Interesting. And I wanted your take on that with regard to African Americans and that vote and drawing it in. In light of what just happened this past week in Wisconsin and the protests that have now pretty much exploded across the country and especially in Kenosha, what we've seen now with the NBA maybe canceling the rest of its season because the players say, look, this can't keep happening. And of course, I'm referring to the African American shot by the white officer 7 times in the back. I wonder, with that happening and the Republicans addressing this issue, how do they handle it, or how do you think they handled this last night?
Well, basically last night they pretty much ignored it. The contrast they've tried to draw is to paint the Democrats as condoning rioting as opposed to peaceful protests. The problem, of course, they had last night is that, the 2 deaths that occurred apparently as a result of, a Trump supporter, which clearly doesn't mean that, Trump promoted it or whatever, but it sort of muddled any message that you might have had there. Both sides do seem to be portraying this as the election of a lifetime or the election of the century. If you listen to the Democrats, we can't, democracy is not unlikely to survive 4 more years. And if you listen to the Republicans, if we elect Joe Biden, we might as well have elected Bernie Sanders or maybe even Karl Marx.
Well, and it is interesting, too. Timing sometimes is everything. And I'm inclined to agree. I don't know what the numbers are like for watching both of these conventions at this point. But, right now for the Republicans, certainly, think about what they're up against in terms of what's happening. Not only the shooting incident in Kenosha, Wisconsin, but also right now Hurricane Laura. Oh, my goodness. And we don't know. I mean, tonight the Republicans, and we've even heard at one point that the president tonight has floated. I mean, he's still going to give his acceptance speech as we sit here now, but even the possibility of postponing it because, gosh, by this afternoon, they're going to get these emergency crews into some of these areas where people didn't evacuate, and we could end up, and I fear this, and I sure hope not, with a massive loss of life. And that's happening right now during this convention, and I think all eyes right now are on the Gulf.
Yeah, this is fairly dear to my heart. I lived for 12 years in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Wow.
We were very concerned yesterday about one of our neighbors who initially was not going to evacuate and did sort of see the light and did so. The only good thing that I hear coming out of that area right now is, and this has happened before and it troubles me a bit, the forecast of the storm surge seems to have been highly exaggerated. Now, not so much in Cameron Parish, which is just south of Lake Charles, and they had an experience in the 1950s where basically everyone who stayed behind died, and that could be the case again for there. But in Lake Charles and elsewhere, as far as I can tell, the predictions that you might have a 12 or 18 foot storm surge appear not to have happened.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Don't want to get too far afield on that, but I think they're saying now the major concern as that moves to land is the wind. And we haven't seen that two-story, storm surge, which would have been just catastrophic. So getting back to the convention then, tonight, and with what we have remaining here, as much as you've seen to this point, and we'll see what the president says tonight, what do you think people will take away as the general theme that came out of this Republican convention? Certainly lots of attacks, as you would expect of the Democrats, just as the Democrats attacked the Republican. But what is the theme, you think, the direction that they went on this?
Well, again, I think there is a good bit, as epitomized by the lack of a platform. There's a good bit of the only person who can save us is Donald Trump, combined with, as we've already discussed, and you saw this on both sides, but, really the platform that's being attributed to the Democrats is not the one they adopted. And, Joe Biden, whatever else you say about him, to try to portray him after 43 years of public service as suddenly becoming some kind of bomb thrower just seems really incongruous to me.
Right. Okay. And so there were an awful lot of attacks of the Democrats. And it seemed to me that, during the Democratic convention, they talked a lot about, at least from the Republican point of view, gloom and doom. Yes. And that's kind of been something that the Republicans tried to grab onto and say, look, it's not so much gloom and doom, it's making America great, trying to stay positive, at least with regard to what they want to do, but at the same time attacking the Democrats. And I don't know, to me, it's just confusing to try to get, frankly, out of either of the conventions, as I watch them, and I haven't watched them nonstop, a general theme that you can really grab hold of. That's why I don't know that it means that much to the general voter one way or the other. Most people's minds are already made up.
I think that's true. Again, I don't think that the Democratic convention was quite as negative as it's being portrayed. They were actually the ones that initially started we're the light and they're the darkness. And the Republicans seem to have taken that and, expropriated it for themselves. So the Republican view of the Democratic convention and vice versa are probably not terribly accurate.
What did you think, by the way? Once again, Tennessee represented, and you had Senator Marsha Blackburn giving a speech, and that she was there. Any observations, takeaways from that?
Well, again, she sort of hit hard on the law, that the Republicans are the party of law and order and that sort of thing. So I didn't think it was terribly out of line with the rest of what we heard.
Yeah. But is that significant? I mean, and I was going to ask you this too, just how do you imagine the list of speakers is chosen? I mean, how is it that someone, now there's certainly plenty of, senators that could have spoke. They chose Marsha Blackburn. They take into account, what do you think when they sit down and decide who are we going to have a speak? Part of it's who's willing to do it, but also, how do you decide who you want to have up there?
Well, you try to put your superstars up, and I think Blackburn would certainly, in the Republican circle, certainly be a rising star. Nikki Haley was another good example. Obviously, the vice president. We've already talked about, family members. Both parties have tried to have sort of John Doe public represented, and I think one of the themes of the Republican Party is that Trump is sort of a blue-collar billionaire, that despite his wealth and his financial success, he seems to identify with working people.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, let's take a break. When we come back, more of our conversation, as well as the role of the conventions. And we're going to talk a little bit about the one debate that remains, if and when it happens. And it's going to be here at Belmont. We'll be right back with more and the professor right after this.